to Transit Unplugged. I'm your host, Paul Comfort, and welcome to the Comfort's Corner edition, where we bring you the inside story and what's happening in and around the transit industry as we respond to and recover from the COVID-19 crisis. And today we've got an action-packed show for you with lots of newsmaker interviews and headline news for you. We'll dig right into it right away. We're going to be bringing you an interview with Kevin Desmond, the CEO of TransLink, who talks to us about how they are now recovering from the COVID-19 crisis. As you know, they had announced layoffs of up to 1,500 employees, and the British Columbia provincial government came through with some funding while they're waiting for the federal government's response. He'll tell us all about that, and really a really interesting look at how they're going to work on their budget for next year. I think you'll want to listen to that, if for no other reason, because he's got a great approach of a scalable capital budget for next year, since things are kind of still up in the air, obviously, on how ridership will come back. We're going to cover a bunch of headline news stories, and then we have a new addition. Elia, one of our hosts, one of our guests on one of my recent podcasts, Elia Carey, talks about kind of a messaging moment for transit agencies. And then I do a longer interview with Mike Bismeyer, who has been our king of kindness on this show, talking about how even during a time of crisis, we need to maintain our kindness toward others. And so we're talking all about that, plus a look at our book, The Future of Public Transportation, and we'll read a portion of the chapter from Phil Verster, CEO of Metrolinx. We want to start off with big news on the CEO front. Very sad news this last week out of San Diego, as Paul Jablonski, the longtime CEO there, passed away suddenly on May 10th. A lot of folks are sending their condolences online. It was a very unexpected thing, and our heartfelt condolences to the agency, to his family. Paul has been over 40 years in the transit industry, very active in APTA. San Diego's Metropolitan Transit System Board appointed Sharon Cooney to take over as CEO for the agency, and she is the first woman CEO in the history of the organization. She said, "I'm honored that the board expressed confidence in me. I think the board also understands that Mr. Jablonski assembled one of the best staffs in the entire country. I'm lucky to have been mentored by one of the nation's most respected transit leaders and to have a group of professionals that are absolutely dedicated to advancing public transit in San Diego. We're all ready to take on the challenges of today and into the future." And she has held many top-level positions at MTS during her 15-year career there, including deputy CEO. And so her appointment comes on the heels of the board's unanimous approval of their FY 2021 budget, a $346 million spending plan that is relying on COVID-19 federal stimulus funds to restore service and balance the budget. It also provides a $1,000 essential worker stipend for all employees. Looking across the industry, one of our bellwether systems is TriMet in Portland, Oregon, and ridership is picking up again for TriMet. I'm very excited to see that. According to the transit agency, riders took more than 631,000 trips last week by bus and by MAX, and that's 15,000 trips more than the week before. It's a slow return to normal. They were seeing 2 million trips per week before the coronavirus outbreak, but still, they're seeing an uptick finally in ridership, and that's big news. In other news, we come out here to the East Coast to a system near where I'm from, and that is WMATA, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, talking about their budget. They have balanced their budget with federal CARES Act funding. The Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, known as WMATA, is using more than $767 million in federal relief funding from the Coronavirus Aid Relief Economic Securities Act, CARES, to close out the current fiscal year with a balanced budget. This comes as WMATA faces an unprecedented drop in fare revenue due to the pandemic crisis response, according to an article in Mass Transit Magazine this week. For the coming fiscal year, the CARES Act funding will also enable WMATA to cover increased expenses driven by enhanced safety measures and manage the risk of lower than anticipated jurisdictional subsidies due to the COVID-constrained budgets. My buddy and CEO, Paul Wiedefeld, says, "We are fortunate to have supporting jurisdictions and a congressional delegation that both understand and advocate for Metro's role in the region's mobility and economy, especially during a crisis." He said, "Thanks to CARES relief funding, we've been able to keep people working and continue to move essential workers as safely as possible during an unprecedented crisis." The board passed a $2 billion FY21 operating budget after months of public input that supported service improvements and fare discounts. And the new budget defers those services and fare initiatives and instead funding WMATA's three-phase recovery plan. Wiedefeld said there's so many variables here that any one of these could put our ability to deliver service at risk. And he said, while we are deeply grateful to Congress for their support, we will need additional help to get the nation's capital moving again. So for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, the new budget proposal anticipates CARES relief funding will replace, get this, $438 million in additional lost revenue, while WMATA ramps up gradually, aligned with requirements from the region's governors and the mayor. And the proposal also provides $45 million in cost cuts through management actions such as deferred supplies purchasing, a hiring freeze, elimination of vacancies to take some pressure off funding jurisdictions with declining tax revenues. And so that's what's happening in Washington, D.C. area. Their $1.82 billion capital program looks like it'll be largely unchanged. What's a look at how some folks are responding to this? Another really interesting approach that I'm seeing across the world is the launching of microtransit services to respond to this COVID-19 crisis. And down in Lubbock, Texas, it's exactly what they're doing. The name of their service is called City Bus, and they're launching a new microtransit service this week, according to a news release from the city. The new service is featuring personalized shuttle service as a means of public transportation that works similar to ride-sharing services like Uber or Lyft, except trips are commingled. And they are allowing same-day bookings made through app or by calling a phone. And the city manager, Jared Atkinson, has told the Lubbock City Council that the new service is being funded by a $9.6 million grant from the federal government. And while their fixed route bus service has been cut back due to COVID-19 pandemic, this new pilot program is a way for folks to take a new look at the services it provides and for the service itself to adapt and change to the demand, according to Chris Mandrell, general manager at City Bus. Mandrell said it's a public transportation service, so the attempt is for every ride to be shared, and it's intended to supplement the fixed route service. It's a demand response type system. It'll be going to be done obviously by the phone app or by calling in to schedule. The city will be broken up into 4 micro transit zones, and they've been exploring this for a while, and now they're going to launch it this week. And again, it's a response to COVID-19 to supplement. It's for the general public, kind of like Ride KC Freedom that our friend Robbie Mackinnon did in Kansas City. And it's another way that cities and transit agencies are responding to things. Interesting news out of Las Vegas. The development of Elon Musk's underground transportation system has achieved a major milestone. The boring machine there in Vegas has broken through the second tunnel, marking the completion of tunnel excavation at the Las Vegas Convention Center. And you may recall this is a big project that's been going on for a while. And this breaking through of the underground tunnel by the boring company is now signals that it is more than 80% complete. And the West Hall expansion and convention center loop are scheduled to debut to the public in January of 2021, just a few months from now, and are part of the destination's investment in bringing groundbreaking transportation solutions to the meeting and conventions industry. Steve Hill, who's CEO of the convention, the Las Vegas Convention Association, Visitors Association there, said this milestone not only helps usher in a future of transportation in Las Vegas, but it signals the destination's ability to push through during trying times and continue to meet the evolving needs of our visitors. And he says Las Vegas continues to break through boundaries. We look forward to offering this first of its kind transportation solution to our convention attendees. This first commercial endeavor from Musk Company is a $52.5 million project, and it will allow convention attendees to be transported across the 200-acre campus in under 2 minutes, free of charge, in all-electric Tesla vehicles. Construction is already underway on all 3 passenger stations for the system. And they've moved from board approval to completing the excavation of both tunnels, 4,500-foot journeys in less than a year. The underground transportation system's 3 passenger stations connect the existing 3.2 million square foot convention center to the $980 million West Hall expansion. So very interesting that things are continuing to move forward and develop, even in the time of COVID crisis. Now stay tuned for our wonderful interviews we've got coming up with Kevin Desmond. I do want to tell you about one more thing coming up this week if you're interested in being a part of it, and that is I'll be I'll be on a podcast coming up, our big webinar coming up this week. We already have over 800 people registered. It's the Metro Magazine's webinar, and I'll be discussing the future of public transportation in a post-COVID world. You can register at Metro Magazine. It's a free event. It'll be held this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific Time. And I'll be the only host, the only guest on the show. And I'll be talking about all the things we talk about on this show, what I've drawn in from interviewing dozens and dozens of transit executives over the last few weeks, what I think the future looks like, and also a look at the book, The Future of Public Transportation, and some of the future-proof items coming out of the book. That's this Friday, May 22nd, a free webinar hosted by Metro Magazine. Join the almost 1,000 people who have already registered for this important event. Thank you so much for being with us today, and let me know what you think about our program as we continue to bring you insightful stories about what's happening in and around the transit industry. For today, I'm Paul Comfort. Stay tuned for our Newsmaker interview with Kevin Desmond, CEO of TransLink. Thanks for being with us today on Transit Unplugged, the Comfort's Corner version. I'm excited today on our Newsmaker hotline to have Kevin Desmond, who is the CEO of TransLink in British Columbia, a good friend of mine, and one of the leading lights in our industry. His transit system was awarded APTA's Large System of the Year award this last year. Kevin, thanks for being with us today on Transit Unplugged.
My pleasure. Good morning, Paul.
Hey, so I guess you're calling from, we're talking both of us from our houses. Is that where you're at? Looks like it.
I'm working from home, growing the beard, and my hair's long until I can get a haircut. But yeah. I'm the work from home thing.
Yeah, my wife just texted me right before this and said, "All right, I got you a haircut for Saturday at 11." I said, "Oh, good, I need it." We're all going to end up looking like we did in our teens before this is over. So tell us, Kevin, from your perspective, what's the current status of things? This show is being aired, the week of May 20th it'll air. And so tell us the current status of things. What's happening there with your transit agency right now?
Well, actually, as we're recording this, today is May 19th, and it happens to be, in a sense, the official reopening day in British Columbia. So almost 2 weeks ago, John Horgan, who's the premier of the province, announced that with the flattening of the COVID curve here, they announced plans and a process for slowly, in a staged manner, reopening the economy. It happened a little sooner than we had been predicting or thought would happen, but I think that's a good tribute to our public health officials managing the crisis. As a matter of fact, on a per capita basis, the rate of infection in British Columbia is quite low, and it rivals that, I think, of some of the countries worldwide that are generally cited as managing the crisis well. So we've been fortunate from that standpoint in British Columbia. So with that, in a certain sense, we at TransLink, as the transit agency, are really moving from the acute crisis phase to now our own recovery phase. We've been frustrated, to be honest with you, that unlike in the United States, we still do not have a transit emergency financing plan in place. Our colleagues in the US now, well over a month ago, in the first $2 trillion congressional plan, got the $25 billion financing. So our colleagues in the US, at least these last number of weeks, they haven't had to focus as much on really crisis management and worrying where the money's coming. They could be focused on operating and perhaps the recovery phase. We here in Canada, unfortunately, had to still be very much focused on how to manage our vastly reduced revenues. And in fact, we'd announced layoffs of about 1,500 people, plus really significant service cuts with the reopening of the economy. However, we in the province came to the conclusion that it would be very, very bad timing to be dramatically cutting for a long period of time service just as the economy is reopening. So we've avoided the layoffs and the service cuts, and we have a little bit of a pledge from the province to backstop us, at least on the money that we otherwise would have saved from the operating cuts.
For the people here in the U.S., maybe you can just, if they haven't heard, explain that in Canada, the federal government primarily has been responsible for capital, and I guess they're not quite ready to cross the Rubicon and get into the operating dollar world?
Yeah, that's right. In Canada, they don't have the kind of the mixture and diversity of funding programs through the FTA, whether it's the Formula Grant program or other major New Starts type programs. In Canada, only recently has there been very significant capital only funding, and exactly the federal government seems at this point reluctant to cross that Rubicon, and I think they see it as a provincial or municipal responsibility. Also, almost all transit systems in Canada are in a sense a function of municipal government. TransLink is unique. It's a little bit more like separate transit authorities in the US. So we don't have a municipal or provincial government direct link. So we're kind of on our own. And that's made our financial situation that much more problematic. But that said, you know, our colleagues in Toronto, they're facing the exact same kind of financial deficit. And most of the city of Toronto's financial deficits are from the Toronto Transit Commission. So one way or the other, we really believe that there is a very strong policy nexus for the federal government and the provinces to be supporting public transit in this country. They don't want to see transit systems in the major metropolitan regions or even in smaller cities becoming diminished. And as we end this year and going into next year, actually have to face permanent service cuts and or cancellation of significant capital projects. So we want to find a way to avoid that as we now are in this recovery phase and as we begin to amp up the conversations with federal and provincial governments on the so-called rebuilding phase when stimulus dollars may come. Now, one of the things we're trying to encourage from the federal government is the color of money may not be as important. The extent to which if the federal government were interested in providing aid through capital and they don't want to cross that Rubicon, I like your phrase, Paul, there are ways they can do that can still help because we debt finance much of our capital. So if they were to increase federal share of projects, reducing the local share, that means less debt financing costs, and that can be plowed right back into making up operating deficits.
That's it. So are you proposing that to the government as CUDA and all the guys here?
Oh yes, yeah. No, that's been part of the conversations we've been having quietly with anyone that will listen, with the federal government, and you know how we're communicating with our provincial government here in British Columbia.
Well, congratulations on getting some money. It sounds like a little bit from the provincial government and helping you so you don't have to do those layoffs. That's great news for you and for the passengers because it won't be such a big ramp up. And is that what you're starting to expect now? Let's turn and look a little bit to the recovery. You mentioned that this week after Victoria Day, you're expecting to see some things starting to open up.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the interesting conundrum that we face, same as everybody else in our business, is how do you start thinking of welcoming back your transit customers? Our ridership's down 83% here, not unusual, of course, in the North American or worldwide environment. How do you start welcoming them back, rebuilding that trust and confidence that it's safe for me to take a bus or a train, but at the same time, either how do you manage or you create mitigations for social distancing? So right now, our buses are still operating in effect at 30% of normal scheduled capacity as we block off every other seat on the buses and we don't allow standees. So we don't want to have these images of crowding. But as more and more people begin to circulate as the economy opens up and more people here in the very positive transit environment that we had prior to COVID in the Vancouver region, how do you find ways to welcome them back? They feel confident, but you don't have overcrowded buses and SkyTrains, and how do you mitigate for that? So we've been working with provincial officials, and very shortly we'll be going out and communicating to the public just how we're going to do that. We believe face masks have to be part of that solution. They're not mandated here in British Columbia, but we want to find a way to, working with health authorities, to message to the general public that probably masks are part of at least the near-term environment on buses and trains. I think that can increase a little bit of the comfort of people being on trains and buses that might start to appear overcrowded. That said, we do expect ridership to come back quite slowly.
Quite slowly, yeah. That's especially, I think, on commuter services is the expectation I'm hearing from people all over North America. The ones that have been hit the worst And the ones that were doing the best at the end of 2019, with 5% increases, are now going to be the slowest to recover. It's a shame.
Yeah. Well, we sort of have this conversation internally a lot. I wouldn't call it a debate at this point. I'm actually fairly bullish on the return of ridership in the Vancouver region. I do believe it's going to take time. But given the land uses, the density of land uses, the fact that so many of people in our region were being attracted to taking transit, and there's not an elaborate highway system. Eventually, as the world returns to normal, whatever that new normal is going to be, that people are going to want to return to public transit. They're still not going to want to get stuck in traffic driving. Now, the question, of course, becomes, I'm sure you've had this conversation with your industry colleagues and in your podcast, that so-called new normal, how many businesses will allow significant portions of their employees to work from home? How will they stagger the days that people actually come to work? So how many of, formal commuters won't actually be commuting, at least in the near term, even after there is a vaccine or other medical advances in society? We don't know that. But that said, I think at the end of the day, our region will still have an exceptionally good and effective transit system, and people will want to come back to transit. The key is how long that will take and how much damage that will do to our finances over the next, 18 to 24 months.
Yeah. So I have heard from some folks that the financial implications here in the U.S., that COVID funding they got, for those who are funded like with sales tax, like, my buddy Phil, our mutual friend, Phil Washington in L.A., this federal influx of dollars may last them through the end of this fiscal year, or the end of the year. For others who don't have sales tax, and so they're not hit as hard, the money's going to last them a lot longer. Just give us real quickly, as we head out of this, kind of what is your funding matrix look like? And has it been hurt beyond just Farebox? Has it also been are you sales tax funded, or how else are you funded there?
So I feel for our colleagues in the US, and I was speaking to my colleague in Seattle the other day about their prospects going into next year, because sales tax is their funding source. We have three primary funding sources for TransLink. Fares. At the end of last year, our farebox recovery was 58%.
Wow.
Number two is gas tax. So that's a little unusual.
Which is down too.
18.5 cents per liter. Gas tax was reduced by about 60%. So as fewer people drive, less gas tax. Goes back to that issue we just talked about before. If more and more people are working from home, less vehicles kilometer driven, less people buying gas and therefore getting the gas tax. And then that's about 25% of our revenue. And then about a third of our revenue comes from property tax, which has not been hit. Right. So we are unusually reliant on, in effect, two consumption taxes, farebox and gas tax. And we believe farebox, with our very high farebox recovery, will not bounce back that quickly. We actually put off a fare increase that was supposed to take effect July 1st. Who knows when that will happen? So our revenue is going to be challenged. We're estimating at the end of this year a roughly $600 million deficit and a few $100 million more next year. And that assumes there's not a major second wave of infection, that it will be a fairly short-term impact and not a particularly steep recession here. So our bounce back, it just remains to be seen. It probably won't be that much different than transit agencies in the US that are reliant on sales tax. Is it a V-shaped curve? I don't think anyone expects that anymore. Is it a U-shape? And when does that U start the upswing? That's when you start seeing sales tax recover. That's when you'd start seeing, in our environment, gas tax recover. But somewhat different specifics, but the overall, it's still going to be a big challenge as we get through this year. What does 2021 look like for all of us? Can we maintain service? Can we maintain our capital projects and our priorities in our capital projects?
Last question is budget related. When does your budget cycle start, and where are you at in that process? And what you just mentioned, FY 2021, what's all that looking like? Do you have enough info to put it all together now, or?
Yeah, it's a great question, Paul. Our budget's a calendar year. We just launched last week what I call TL21, TransLink 21. How do we focus on getting ourselves internally and our board in a position by the fall to evaluate and adopt a meaningful and balanced budget for next year in an environment of incredible uncertainty? You know, I was at King County Metro in the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, as we were doing our budgeting. While there was a certain amount of uncertainty, it's nothing like that. There is
Right.
not a game plan for this. No one knows what this is like, at least for, even as much as the Great Recession was a steep recession, we had game plans for recessions and how you manage recessions. This one, we don't know. We don't know if there'll be a second wave in the fall. We don't know if there'll be a bad second wave in the winter. We don't know when a vaccine is going to create it. We don't know how much of our world will actually be permanently changed from this. So our own budgeting process, that I call TL21, we're reevaluating our corporate priorities, and then we're going to create scalable buckets of our projects and programs. And we have to reprioritize. What are the new priorities and what are lower priorities now? And how do we shift the funding? So if we've got a pretty good financial outlook, then those buckets are scalable to, pass a budget for a more favorable outcome. If our budget forecast is pretty poor, then we're going to have to make cuts. We're going to have to decide what capital projects fall by the wayside. At least from my perspective, not state of good repair. I don't want to defer maintenance. I don't want to pass on a problem to future leaders of TransLink and future taxpayers. So, you have your major capital projects, which are otherwise viewed as job-creating projects, stimulus projects. Would you remove those? That's tough. Those are funded by senior governments. So what else is in your capital program? What other fun things that you're doing? The fun things are general, the things that you do to support ridership growth. How many of those projects might have to fall by the wayside? So we have a lot of work to do, but our plan is to start now, spend some time methodically over the summer, developing new financial models, create a scalable business plan for our board. So in the fall, where we'll have more information, maybe a little bit more certainty over our prospects, we can develop a smart budget.
Wow, I haven't heard anybody else say that, Kevin. That's a really good approach. And thank you for sharing that with us. I think that'll be helpful to a lot of our listeners of transit executives around the world as a great way to approach capital budgeting and operating budgeting going forward. Thanks for being with us today on this episode. And we look forward to talking to you next time.
I'm Aaliyah Carey, a consultant who loves to help transit organizations innovate their communication strategies to build ridership and secure broader community support. We're starting to emerge from the first difficult and shocking months of the coronavirus pandemic. And we all know how important it is to communicate that transit vehicles, stops, and stations are clean and safe to use again. We're already seeing cleanliness as a theme in transit ads and media. But I want to propose an addition to those more traditional forms of communications, kind of like a 3D expansion on message delivery. Why not let riders see anti-infection cleaning going on right in front of them as a part of daily vehicle and facility use? This would involve not just regular cleaning like sweeping and mopping, but putting staff in appropriate protective wear onto vehicles and in facilities where they can perform a sort of ongoing cleanliness theater, as David Zipper from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government calls it. That presence, agency staff whose clear mandate it is to fight infection throughout the day, could provide the right before your eyes factor that other communications channels lack. I also want to suggest that you view cleanliness theater as a communications task, not an operations function. That shift in thinking could allow you to deploy basically what's a street marketing team around cleanliness, one of the most important concepts of our time. You could get new insights that inform future marketing and service delivery by doing this. Your cleanliness street marketing team can give you direct feedback from riders, and you can include more formal marketing data collection like rider surveys and social media data analytics. That's one messaging idea I had as transit emerges into fuller operations in a time of COVID-19. If you'd like to talk about that or other transit communications, look me up on LinkedIn. My first name is spelled E-L-E-A, last name C-A-R-E-Y.
Thanks for being with us today on Transit Unplugged, the Comforts Corner edition. And today I'm excited to have on our line Mike Bismeyer. Mike has been providing us Mike's Minute on kindness over the last few episodes of the show. And he and I are good friends, and we had talked about the importance during this time of recovery, managing through and now recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, that, you know, we maintain kindness to each other during this time. We're not able to kind of meet in person, and there's a lot of tension and stress in the world as a result of this, and sickness. And I thought it was a great addition to the show and wanted to have a few minutes today to talk to Mike. So Mike, thanks for being a guest on today's program.
Hey, Paul, thanks for having me. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate you continuing to lead us with the information. And also, before we get anywhere, I also want to thank the frontline workers that continue to work hard every day to selflessly make it better for us. So truly appreciate it. So thanks for having me.
So before we get started, I wanted to ask you some about your background but tell us what you do, like in your role in the public transportation industry now.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a regional sales director for Canada and the Pacific Northwest for Proterra. Of course, we sell a battery electric bus. So I have been with Proterra about just over a year. And prior to that, I was in the transportation sort of space for 12 and a half years with the Seon Safe Fleet entity. So been around for a little while, by no means as long as a lot of the good folks out there, but I really like being in this transit world. So thank you.
Yep. And you're based out of British Columbia, right, in Canada?
I am. I live about an hour east of Vancouver, a town called Abbotsford, British Columbia, right across the Sumas-Washington border. So we're a border town. Have the privilege of looking out every day across the line to Mount Baker. So yeah.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So tell us about, I mean, ever since I met you, you've been big on kindness. And I know you've spoken at a number of groups like CUDA, the young leaders group there, and others about the importance of kindness. Tell us about what your thoughts are on that and why, how you got started in kind of this crusade you're on.
Sure, and I really appreciate you asking. And yeah, there's really a couple of reasons I became sort of a self-proclaimed kindness advocate, sort of outside of my normal role, but obviously in our day-to-day lives, it's very important. And, the two reasons really, I came from a family where I have, my dad's my best friend to this day. Probably the first and best mentor I ever had, with little tidbits. Of course, as a kid growing up, you didn't listen to them until they made sense much later. But, my dad's a recovered alcoholic who just, took who celebrated his 40th year of sobriety this past January. So, he changed his life when I was about 10 years old. And it was really an incredible journey for all of us, because my dad, he made a pact from the day he got sober and well to, every year continue to give back and to help others who were less fortunate. And, it was an amazing education for my sister and I, because, we have had every year for Christmas dinner and all through the year, my dad is always trying to help someone else who needs a better opportunity. And, we grew up in a home where we just never looked at anybody, any sort of ethnicity, both diversity, economically, different than anyone else. Everyone was just a guest at our table. And I think it was a great education. And just seeing how my dad is for always, efforting and trying to give back. And of course, my mom was incredibly resilient, keeping the family together and joining my dad on the journey. And my parents have been married over 50 years. So a great example. And, my dad still is trying to help someone every day. He's 76 and still participates, in his local chapter of AA and helping out in the community, trying to give back to shelters and homes. And we do a couple fundraisers each year together. So that was one of the main reasons, I just saw, my dad coined a lot of the phrases that I use. He always sort of said to us both that we should go through life with remembering that we're all sort of one bad decision from being the story that no one wants to hear. And it's always important to listen to people, because it might be all they have. So, those little tidbits like that over the years. And then the other part of the reason I became passionate is, and part of my story that a lot of people don't know is, I was bullied pretty much as a kid. When I was a young kid, I was a chunky little guy, and my wonderful mom used to keep telling me that I just hadn't hit my growth spurt. But I had a couple of years in school where I was bullied pretty relentlessly, and I actually didn't even want to go to school anymore. And, but it was a random act of kindness that sort of changed my perspective. And sort of what happened is, I used to have this, one particular individual that, every morning when I show up at the bus stop, he would, take my lunch in front of the other kids or whatever and throw it in the garbage can and say I didn't need to eat, and all this sort of stuff. And anyway, this went on for a long time. And, unbeknownst to me, another kid who I was not friends with at all had sort of witnessed this. And one day when I was getting on the school bus and sort of walking back to try and find a seat, this random kid who was a grade ahead of me said, "Hey, you can sit with me." And, I was obviously a little shaken from the morning ritual at the bus stop. And I sat down, and when the bus started to move, he just sort of looked at me and he said, "Hey, don't worry, I got your back." And I didn't know what he was talking about. And, he opened his knapsack and he had brought an extra lunch. And, that changed my perspective for a long, long time, because he had witnessed what was going on, knew it wasn't right, didn't make a scene in front of anybody else, but sort of approached me. And, he had brought an extra lunch because he saw mine was getting thrown away every day. And, all of a sudden something triggered in me that changed my perspective on, hey, there's a way around this without, violence or without, doing something extreme. And it gave me an idea to sort of change what I was doing every day. And Paul, you probably remember back in the day when we went to school, we had pencil cases, which a lot of people might not realize. And what I started to do was hide my good lunch, my sandwich in my pencil case. And I'd start to bring things my mom didn't even want in the fridge every day, put that in the bag, and I'd let the bully throw that away. And after a while, it just didn't even bother me anymore. And he eventually moved on because he wasn't getting a reaction from me. But, that's something that's always stuck with me. And at my last company, I had an opportunity to be part of the founding members that formed a group called United to End Bullying, which is an organization that's still going strong, very proud of it. Became the national spokesperson for that, had a wonderful opportunity to interact with kids. We created a foundation where we had grants that we gave away every year to schools and kids that wrote about kindness and anti-bullying initiatives in their schools. And we would have a panel that would judge on these ideas, and I'd go down and present the checks. But really good opportunity to interact with large schools and speak in front of the kids and talk to them about bullying and kindness. And and it's just grown from there. And obviously there's always the parlay back to the workplace and mentorship and leadership as well.
Very good. And so let's have one last little discussion about how can we, in this age of kind of recovering from COVID, as public transportation providers, I know that so many of our companies, companies like TransDav and other private contractors, as well as transit agencies, are involved in really kindness initiatives, such as, handing, Meals on Wheels and other types of things. But as an individual, what is your thoughts about, as we wrap this up, about how we can show kindness in the workplace?
Yeah, and I think it's amazingly simple, and I think you're right. We've been inspired every day by organizations and individuals that are stepping up and going above and beyond. Just this morning I was watching this morning with Kelly and Ryan this morning with my wife, and they had a WMATA bus driver on there that was the hero of the day. So you're right, it's around us every day. And I think it's very important in the workplace to, a simple act of kindness is sometimes even just saying hello, acknowledging people, understanding that we're all getting through life with certain things behind us. And I think if you look around us, and it's one of the things that I learned very early on, and I practice it daily, and I think kindness daily is a ritual to get into, right? To think positive instead of negative when, we're sort of led by media sometimes. But I think every time we look around, there's every workspace, every opportunity we're in, there's an opportunity to be kind or to do something different. And it can be as simple as holding a door, helping someone carry something. I was at the grocery store just yesterday with my wife, and helped someone get something into their car that seemed to be struggling. And my wife just laughs because she hates going anywhere with me because she calls me, I'm always distracted by something other, But in the workplaces, it's very important. There was a Forbes study, I think just over a year and a half ago, where they talked about workplace and people that were leaving and turnover. And, only 12% of those people surveyed actually left for money. A lot of them left because they didn't like the environment. And when they talked to those people, I think the 80% that left for other things, 53% of those people said they were unhappy just with the lack of recognition or a simple thanks never being done at work anymore. And I think that's how easy and how important it is, right? Saying thank you is really the foundation we should believe. I always say kindness is cool. It's free. We should give it away. And mentorship, leadership, I think we've seen some amazing leaders. I think APTA has done a tremendous job. I think CUDA has been amazing with being in front of the people and speaking. People like yourselves, there's podcasts every day. I think we've truly seen in a very short time how many incredible people we have and how well educated we're becoming on something we knew nothing about. If you talk about COVID and the pandemic, But I think that's also what mentorship and leadership is, right? You know, a lot of companies want to try and appoint a mentor. You can't do that, right? Mentors are people that just have values and do things that others want to emulate. And I think kindness is something we all want to emulate. It's contagious. And so I just say, you know, try and be kind first, and always try and be a little kinder than necessary, and life will be a lot better.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike Bismeyer. Thanks for keeping our minds on the important aspects of how our personal interactions with others can impact their day, their life, and their work. Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us today on Transit Unplugged, the Comforts Corner edition. And today we've reached a portion of our program where we do a reading from my best-selling book, The Future of Public Transportation. The book reached #1 status on Amazon earlier this year for transportation books and remains a bestseller there, where we've included the input of over 40 transit experts and futurists as they take us into the future of public transportation. This book was published just as the coronavirus crisis was hitting, and much of the book is future-proof, where the input they've given us continues to be valid, and it's revelatory to me to see how that even after the impact of COVID-19, how much of the direction we were headed in is still where we need to go, and actually even more of it in that direction. I've recently published an article in Metro Magazine where he talked about the 5 long-term implications of the coronavirus on transit. And one of them is, you know, the death of the fare box. That was happening before COVID-19. And we talk about that in the book, and now it's even more relevant. Well, one of the great leaders of our industry, Phil Verster, who is president and CEO of Metrolinx in Toronto, Canada, wrote a chapter for my book. It's great to have both ends of Canada represented on today's show, where Kevin Desmond, the CEO of TransLink in the West in British Columbia, was our newsmaker interview. And we're also going to cover a portion of the show now with Phil Verster, who's head of Metrolinx in Toronto on the East Coast of Canada. You probably are aware that the way transit works in Canada is it's largely headed through and funded, as we talked about in our interview with Kevin, from like British Columbia and Ontario. It's the provinces, which in my mind is the Canadian version of states. And so Phil is head of Metrolinx, which is the state agency, so to speak, or the provincial agency that oversees transportation in Ontario, which includes Toronto. And so he directly operates the commuter services, Go Transit, which is Go Bus, Go Commuter Train, and UP Express, Up Express, which is for the airport. But they're also Toronto's regional transit planner, almost like a metropolitan planning organization here in the U.S., and responsible for some massive capital investment projects. They're overseeing the Go expansion with 4 consortiums of $30 billion, and also the Toronto subway expansion. One other little interesting tidbit about Metrolinx is that they're the largest free provider of free parking in North America, with over 70,000 free parking spots across all their facilities. Phil wrote a chapter called The 4 Musts, which talks about 4 things he thinks that we must do in our transit agencies. Let me read to you from chapter 11, page 110 of our book, The Future of Public Transportation. He says, hereby my thoughts on the 4 must transit organizations must espouse of safety, business culture, customer, and innovation. Number 1, every transit organization must have an intense, passionate, and systematic core business philosophy of safety first. Number 2, transit organizations must operate and adopt the behaviors of commercial businesses in everything they do, and must not become departments or agencies or bureaucracies. Amen to that, brother. And number 3, transit teams must focus on customer benefits and must innovate in order to excel at satisfying customers. And number 4, a positive focus on responsibly and effectively adopting innovation must be used to reinvent operations, increase customer satisfaction and revenue while reducing costs. Again, more true now than ever as we try to attract passengers back on to the transit system. That's just the summary he puts on page 110. There's several more pages in his chapter where he talks in depth about those, the 4 musts. You can get a copy of the book easily online. It's on Amazon for digital download, or a softback copy can be mailed to you. And it's also on Barnes & Noble. So Phil's also going to be on a podcast with me or a webinar coming up with me in June. I'll tell you more about that as we get closer to it. And for UITP is doing a global webinar focused, a lot of the folks who listen will be in the Australia, New Zealand area, but it'll be a worldwide webinar talking about the future of public transportation and what's coming. Hey, thanks for being with us today on this episode of Transit Unplugged, as we bring you and brought you headline news, two great new portions of the program with Mike and Elia's comments, a good newsmaker interview, and a look at our book, The Future of Public Transportation. I also want to let you know I'm working on a children's book, a children's picture book. That's right. It's basically comes off the concept of the future of public transportation, but it's the past, present, and future of public transportation for children. And it's illustrated. I've got the illustrator working on it right now. We cover, each phase of public transportation over the last 200 years, each new innovation from, the Tom Thumb railroad back in the 1800s all the way through Hyperloop and beyond. And there's pictures on each page of a different type of vehicle, whether it's a cable car in San Francisco, or like I said, up to Hyperloop and beyond, and lots of different phases in between. And it's really a good book, I think, for those of us who work in the public transportation industry to give to our children or grandchildren. I can't wait to give my grandchildren a copy of it. So they can kind of see, what you do in the business. Each page talks a little bit. There's fun facts on there, or did you know? How, like, for instance, that a cable car doesn't have the engine in the vehicle. It's at the end of the street, and that just runs the cable, and the car clamps onto the cable. Maybe you didn't even know that. But it's all kinds of interesting little tidbits like that about how public transportation has really helped our society and cities and our countries grow and prosper, and be able to move, the masses of people that are necessary for commerce to take place, and for people to get, places they need, like shopping and visit schools and everything. So it's going to be a fun book. It'll probably be called, coming out later this summer or early fall. And it'll be called something like, The Past, Present, and Future of Public Transportation. We're working on the title right now. And it's an exciting picture, cartoon style book for young people, maybe ages 5 through 13 or 14. Be a fun addition, hopefully, to your children's reading so they understand a little bit more about our industry. Thanks again for being with us. Stay safe out there.